Hi, I'm Cheryl Manning, and I'm on the Bonsai Time podcast, Bonsai On.
Welcome to the Bonsai Time podcast, the tree hugger's #1 spot for history, horticulture, and having fun. And
this is part 2 of our episode with Cheryl Manning. I'm here to ask her about the history of bonsai in California, partly because I'm interested in the history of bonsai in California because I'm a California native, but also there was such a rich history here from my understanding, because John Naka was here and so were many others that were pioneers in bonsai in the Western world. And I'm hoping Cheryl will share the rich history and from her perspective and what she experienced, because she was kind of in the midst of it when it was booming. Mm-hmm. Cheryl, can you tell us a little bit about how you got so involved in bonsai in California? And I know in part 1 of our episode with you, you said these people that were pioneers, they were just regular people to you because you didn't know who they were. Mm-hmm. And if I had to guess, just because I think a lot of people are pretty humble, they probably didn't know who they were in terms of knowing that they were going to be legends or pioneers.
Yeah, very true. I can't actually tell you about the bonsai in California. I can only tell you about bonsai in Southern California.
Oh, right, Southern California.
Because there's a lot of rich history in Northern California. And even though I was born in San Francisco, that's not where I did my bonsai work. So yeah, I was actually friends with some wonderful people from Northern California, but the ones I really know are down in Southern California, mostly in the LA and Orange County areas. Yeah, there were a couple of people who knew that they were legends or special. One of my first friends, Ben Oki. Ben Oki, he was traveling around the country. And he was doing workshops and demonstrations. So, and even to South America, he went there. But he was not the first. Actually, the first bonsai artist to travel and share was John Naka. Mm-hmm. He was the very first. He started traveling before any Japanese started traveling. And he traveled to South Africa, to Australia, throughout Europe, Canada. He said basically the only place he didn't go was Asia because they didn't need him to tell them how to do bonsai. But he traveled for years, and he was the consummate workshop demonstrator and workshop leader, because John, he was everything that you would want in bonsai. He had the bonsai knowledge. He had he started in Japan with his grandfather. He had all the culture behind it. He was a fine artist. He was a painter. He had that artistic sensibility he could impart on trees. But he was also an educator, and he was funny. So he was entertaining, and he was this little tiny man, but he could hold a room. So he was the first guy to travel. And he brought Ben Oki on to assist him. And that's when Ben Oki started traveling. And as John Naka was winding down on the travels, Ben Oki was picking up the slack. So when I was meeting them, they were doing a lot of traveling, and they knew that they had an audience, and they had they were known throughout the country or the world. Others were more content to just be here in LA doing their thing, and just really wonderful. Some of them, like Richard Ota, his English it's a little hard to understand Richard Ota, but he co-wrote a book with John Naka on Satsuki bonsai. So they're some of these guys, they had books published, and but they were really well respected here, and I quickly learned how special it was that we had so many people that knew that were really good bonsai artists. Most of them, it's Harry Hirao, Richard Ota, Ben Oki, Frank Goya, Sam Nakano, and many others. They took class with John Naka. John was their first teacher. That's how they got started, and then they just blossomed and they moved on. But it was a really big presence. What happened and I don't, Harry Hirao became famous. He became known as Mr. California Juniper. He's not the first one to collect junipers. It was John Naka. It was an art teacher that when she saw his bonsai, she said, "Oh, there's some kind of cute trees." She lived out in Palmdale or someplace, and you might want to look at this stuff. And so he was the first one to collect California junipers. John Naka introduced Harry Hirao and all of his other students to collecting. Well, Harry went to town on that. Harry became Mr. California Juniper, going up sometimes 2-3 times a week to collect junipers. He was a mountain goat. John Naka was into the suiseki, the stones, and he'd been collecting, and he introduced many people to collecting. So John really kind of started a lot of what happened down here with all these other wonderful bonsai artists. It started with John. He was the king of bonsai in Southern California, and really throughout the world. I was very fortunate that, in addition to being my sensei, that he was a true friend. I would go to his house, he'd come to mine, and I was very fortunate to be around him. He was always generous. When I was accepted as an apprentice in Japan, I was going to have to stop taking John's class. And a friend of mine came up to me, and it was a CBS show reception, and said, "Ha ha ha, you're going to Japan, but I get your seat in your class." And I said, "Oh, well, congratulations." And I was a little sad because, my dream of going to Japan was going to happen, but I was losing out. I would no longer be a student of John's. And John came up to me a little later that evening, and he told me, "Cheryl, when you get back from Japan, there's always a place for you in my class." He wanted me. And I said, so it's, the generosity that he and the others showed. They were all mentors. I learned a lot from all of them. And they really did become friends. That's what we do in bonsai. We mentor, or we are mentored, and we become family. Mm-hmm. And with John, being a student was amazing, and but as he got older, his hearing got worse. He had hearing aids, but in groups that didn't work out well. His shoulder was sore. He had tendonitis or something, it was harder for him to work on trees. He couldn't hear. One of the things that John did every year, he would go to Washington, D.C. He'd go to the Arboretum and he'd say hello to Goshin. He'd work on the trees, and we had a board meeting. And he no longer wanted to go there because he couldn't hear anything and he couldn't really work on the trees. And so my friend Maribel said, Cheryl, why don't you come with us? And I was his ears. So he could finally participate in meetings. I would just have to write down everything. And so he had a ball. He was entertaining. He was being John, and he was participating again. And that was the last traveling he did. He would go to Washington, D.C. every year. And he was so adored there. Harry Hirao would also join us. And it was a wonderful time. As John, he wanted to slow down on the trees. He wanted to do more painting and slow down on the trees, but he never stopped working on his trees. At the end, the last year of his life, Maribel and I would go over there once a week, and I was his hands. I would be his ears, but then I was his hands. So he would sit there and tell me what he wanted me to do on his trees. So he wasn't actually doing the work. I was doing the work. And it was a very special time that I was able to give back to him. He had given me so much. And at the end, I was able to help him out and help keep those trees in good shape. We had, when I joined, this is throughout the 80s and 90s. All of these legends of bonsai, they were very active. They were, the clubs were thriving, and we would go looking for stones or collecting California junipers. And it was just a wonderful experience, get out in nature and hang out with friends. And it was a lot of hard work, and we'd be exhausted, but it was just a joyful time. And then when I joined, I was the young thing. I had color in my hair. I could move, and I was in such awe of these elders of bonsai. And then one by one, we were saying goodbye. And I'm just a little heartsick because just a few days ago, I lost another dear friend, Larry Regal. And these are people that, so many of my favorite memories of bonsai are with these dear friends that are no longer with us. And thank God for the memories, thank God for the experiences. And I really appreciate all that I've learned from them. But it is very hard as we all get older. But they were so much older than I, and we've lost most of them. Not all. There's still a few that are. Kei Yamaguchi, 103 years old.
Yep, Frank Shignia is still around.
And Richard Ota.
Yep.
Yeah, so three of my old. I've been friends with them for 40 years. It's 40 years they've been my friends. And I think those are the last three. Yeah. We lost Frank Goya not too long ago. And so, I have some trees in my backyard that have belonged to. I've got a Larry Regal tree back there. I'm going to have to get that in shape. put that, it's very sad. It's sad that so many have passed, but I am just really honored that I was able to learn from them and call them my friends. So on the bright side, there are a lot of, not quite as many, but there are new kids coming up, kind of like you, Kelly. New kids coming up, people that are energetic, that want to learn, that want to, continue this art. And it is a beautiful thing. So it's, there's much to be motivated with as we celebrate the people from the past. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I'm kind of curious about?
Mm-hmm.
Why Southern California? Why was that such a hotbed? Like, all these people were here and they just started doing bonsai and then sharing it with the Western world. Like, why here? Why not somewhere else?
Because John Naka was here.
Okay.
It started with John Naka. And again, all the other guys, they're Americans. Well, actually, no. Ben Oki's actually from Japan. He was Japanese and came over after. But most of the other ones, they were just Japanese gardeners,
Mm-hmm.
as was John. He was gardening. Well, he was a farmer in Colorado. He was a farmer. And then after the war, he moved to California and was doing landscaping. But he learned when he would visit when he was schooled in Japan and living with his grandfather, he learned bonsai. So he had that background. And then he pursued it when he moved, not in Colorado, but when he moved to California in Los Angeles. He decided, I'm going to do bonsai, and he got started with it. So here's this Japanese American who studied with his grandfather in Japan, who came back here and he started bonsai. And there were some other Japanese people doing bonsai also, but he was the one that had the skill set to actually go on stage and really do the demos and speak in English, because most of the Japanese in Southern California doing the bonsai were doing it in Japanese. And he was one of the first, if not the first, Japanese bonsai artist to teach in English to Caucasians. And that was a big difference. That was, the acceptance. So he became really popular. And again, he had his Japanese proverbs that he'd throw in to his demonstrations and workshops. And the other thing, the sketches he did. So as he's traveling, and this is one of the things he said, he would travel, but his English was not good enough for him to really convey in words what should happen to the tree. So he relied on sketches. So he would do these little sketches, workshops or demonstrations, and it's like, yeah, this is where I see the tree. It's in a plastic can now, but this is kind of pot. Here's the attitude of here's the branching, here's the dead wood. So in sketches, he could convey what the tree should look like, that the future of the tree. And that, that's why this was such a hub of activity, because of his command of the stage, his willingness to teach Caucasians, and his leadership with the Japanese gardeners.
Why do you think he was willing to break out of just teaching in Japanese and started teaching in English?
Because he's an American.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like, this should be for everyone. And there was a bit of an attitude with some. It's like, this is ours. This is our art. You're American. This is a Japanese art. It's for the Japanese. He's an American, and he said this should be for everyone.
He just reminded me of a quote of his. I don't know it like
Mm-hmm.
by heart, but I just remember it was something like, maybe it was a poem he wrote, or maybe it was just a quote.
Haiku.
Bonsai's for everybody, if you're rich, poor, or just anything. Like it's just an art you can share with everyone.
Absolutely. And kind of with my attitude, beginner, intermediate, advanced, I don't care where you are, it is for everyone. You know, it's something that should be a joyful experience.
Even if you eventually become a master, you had to start from like a beginner level.
I wasn't an immediate master. No, no. That's the one thing, you know. And I learned from the master in Japan. It's like one fact that all bonsai people share, whether you're just a beginner or you're the master in Japan winning big awards, you've killed trees. There's, you know, everybody has their little graveyard of trees. Life happens. That's just part of the process, whether you're a master or a beginner. It's a heartache. And you learn from this. And that's the thing. It's a process. There's an evolution in the art, in your experiences, and your growth. It's you know, that's the one thing. This is an art, but it is ever changing. You know, you paint you paint a picture, it dries, it's done. It's bonsai is never done, and to see how it evolves over time. Sometimes it's not so pretty, but often it just, over the years, you know, trees that I've done like 30, 35, 40 years ago, I look at them, you know, and it's like, oh my God, look how beautiful that is. You know, it started as just a little thing, and it's wonderful to see that evolution. But it's also the evolution. It's the evolution of the tree, but it's the evolution of the artist too. You know, you that process is something. It was, you know, it's like, well, you stop learning when you die. You know, you stop learning when you stop breathing, and that's the thing. It's there's always something new to learn, and I do love that about bonsai, because I'm always learning.
Have you ever wondered what the art form would be in the Western world without John Naka?
Oh no, I hadn't actually given that a thought. I will say that there are some wonderful, wonderful bonsai artists that I've met over the years. I'm in Northern California. I never met Yuji Yoshimura. I think that was his name, in the East Coast. That was Bill Valvanis's sensei, and he spoke so highly of him. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, he's the one that went around the world. Others kind of stayed in their cities or in their, you know, or in the States. I don't know of anybody else that actually ventured out like John. But on the other hand, bonsai happens, I think it's the Middle East was the only place. Years ago they were talking about it. It's everywhere except for the Middle East, and maybe it's there now. But yeah, there's wonderful bonsai masters throughout the world. So I don't know if there wasn't. It wouldn't have been as entertaining. John was an entertainer. He made us laugh always. So I think maybe it would have been a little more serious. But yeah, John was fun. So I think he added a little fun to it. So yeah, I don't know. Good question.
And how did you become close to him and his wife?
Well, I'm going to have to thank Maribel for that, because Maribel was one of my best friends. Lost her a year and a half ago, and yeah, we just hit it off. The two of us, we shared a lot of the same passions. We both loved looking for the stones, and and she was a really, really dear friend of mine, and she knew how much I loved John Naka, and she hosted one of his classes in her garage, and she's the one that got me into the class. So, and she was always a big supporter of mine. She was a big supporter of my going to Japan. She was extremely close to John for many years. She knew him like 20 years before I knew him, and they were very close. And when they would go, when Alice and John, when John was traveling to like South Africa, Maribel went with him. Maribel was kind of the companion for Alice and for John, and she was and when they decided the at our bicentennial, the U.S. bicentennial in '76, when Japan gave the U.S. 53 trees, Japanese trees, to celebrate it. That's when there was this decision. Okay, now we're going to have to make a bonsai museum in Washington, D.C. And there was a Japanese pavilion was made. And then the decision, well, but we've got all these wonderful trees from the U.S., North America, Canada, and whatever. Let's make a North American pavilion. We'll make it the John Yoshio Naka North American Pavilion. And Maribel was in charge of fundraising, and she did a stellar job on that. So they were very tight for very many years, and she was one of my best friends. So yeah, Maribel got me into class.
So Maribel helped start the National Museum with John, and then they named a pavilion after him. I did have a question that was kind of burning in my head, and I can't remember it right now.
Oh darn. Well, yeah, she was real close to both of them, and she was, yeah, it comes down to being friends. You got friends that support you. So yeah, by the time I went to Washington, D.C., Alice wouldn't go. That was not happening. So it was Maribel and John and Harry and me most of the time. But yeah, it was lovely to see how others responded to John, because in the end I just push him around in a wheelchair because he couldn't walk that far, and just the adoration was wonderful, because they knew how special he was. And in those last years especially, it was as it was special. It was good.
So you did the artwork for the cover of his
John Naka's sketchbook.
Yeah,
that was that was an idea. Hey, let's do a sketchbook, his sketches from around the world, and those things were collected, and I was originally asked to write an introduction for him, or a history, introduction history. I wrote one of them, and then I ghost wrote the one for John. So there's a history, and then there's an introduction. So I did the writing, and then I was asked to, because I can sketch portraits, and I was asked to make, draw the cover of the book. And we'd have a board meeting, and John say, it's like, where's this sketchbook? It was 2 years in the work, and the lady that was doing it, she just wasn't doing much of anything. He was sitting on it. And I remember John said, am I going to live to see this sketchbook? And he didn't,
Mm-hmm.
which was a shame. However, he did see the cover of it because it was in, I think, in February. I was asked to do the cover, so I sketched John sketching a tree, and it was photographs I had taken in Washington, D.C. So it was him sketching this bald cypress grove. And I came to his house one day, and I said, "Here it is. There's a sketch of John sketching." So he did actually see that a couple months before he passed, and it was a year later that I finished editing the book. So it was published a year after he passed. But it was well received, and I'm happy it's out of print now.
Yeah, it was hard to find one. I had to look all over eBay.
Yeah, you got to come to the Bonsai-a-thon.
Yeah, I saw a couple copies.
Yeah, I'll always be putting a couple of copies in. So I've got I've the perfect books I sent to Stone Lantern, but I kept anything that had any little flaws. I held back, and those now I'm donating. Donate to clubs and fundraisers and things. So it lives on. But he was really happy about that. Actually, one of the things about John, at the end, the last few years of his life, he reflected on bonsai techniques, which has been nicknamed the Bonsai Bible.
That's what I heard.
Yep, that's what we call it, the Bonsai Bible. It's what most of us started with. And, you know, if you read it, it's like you look at some of the stuff, it's quite outdated. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sorry, your soil mixture, get some dirt from your yard and then add a little bit of this and add a little bit of that. And he looked at it and he said, you know, I really would love to revise that. There, as the evolution of bonsai, things change. And what he used for soil mixture back in the day, he wasn't using, you know, he completely changed it. No more soil from the yard. But he wasn't the one that really did the book. It was Alice. And he said, I'd like to update this. And she said, not happening on my watch. And that was the end of that. If she wasn't going to take it on, it wouldn't happen. But you know, he was the first to admit there's some stuff in my book that you have to ignore because we know better now.
I'm glad you said that, because I think there's this perception that in Southern California, or California in general, but particularly Southern California, because this is where John Naka is from, mm-hmm. that there's people that follow bonsai techniques or John Naka's teachings like it's the only way to do bonsai and the only rule. Like those are the rules and that's what we do. Mm-hmm. I mean, you studied in Japan, so obviously there's different ways to do work on trees. And you spoke with John about it, and he's like, mm-hmm. you know, as you learn or evolve, things change.
I'll give you an example of John learning, and John would redo things. His in Washington D.C., he's got a blue atlas cedar, large blue atlas cedar.
I saw, I think,
and the original front of the tree, the front for many years was the front in part because there was a large branch cut on the backside, and it was hideous. Just this hideous cut. And so that was that. And he went there. There was one time he goes and he's turning the thing around, and this horrible cut had evolved into this beautiful, the wart was now a beauty mark. Mm-hmm. So you could see whether it was, I don't know if it was, you know, more how it had healed or if it had the way it had scarred, whatever it was beautiful. And he looked at it and he said, you know what? My back is now my front, because as it's evolved, that's now more interesting. It's not a flaw, it's a feature. He did that a lot of times. Other things he said, you know, you got the tree in the perfect pot. And he says, you know, it's kind of like wearing pants. You don't want to wear the same pair of pants all the time. And so sometimes you have to get up in, sometimes the tree kind of outgrows the pot, or, as things change, or or your artistic sensibility. Oh, you found a different shape of a pot that you like even more, or a color of the clay. And so, yeah, he was never the person that said, this is the one and only way you do it. What he said is, you really need to understand the rules before you break them. Know what the rules are, and then you go do what you want. For instance, you repot conifers in the winter or early spring. You don't do it in mid-August in your hot backyard in Whittier. But John chose to, Maribel and I had helped repot a pine tree of his. And I whispered to Maribel, I've just killed a John Naka pine. We're repotting in the middle of a hot August day. Tree's fine.
Yep.
Tree's now in the Huntington collection.
I heard it has more to do with aftercare.
Huge part of it. Yeah. But there are, if you've repotted something and your aftercare is not perfect. I mean, even the repotting process, Maribel was there with the water bottle spritzing the roots because they would dry out so quickly. So even the during care, as we're repotting, she was, blessed her heart, she was trying to keep that alive. But yeah, we've all broken rules. Sometimes we pay the price. Other times we're okay. But that is one of the things that John had no problem with people learning from different people. It's like, find out what works for you, find out who you like. In Japan, when you study with one sensei. It's really bad to go hopping to different bonsai masters. But all these different bonsai masters, they have different ways of doing the same thing. They, different soil mixes, different ways of grafting, the wiring, the carving. They have their tricks of the trade, their big secrets, gives them an advantage. And so there's not one perfect way to get anything done. So, the way Kimura does things, Mitsuya does things differently than Kimura, who does differently from Suzuki. And it's all okay. The trees are beautiful. So, as long as they're green, it's a good thing.
Do you have any final thoughts on just bonsai in Southern California or John Naka?
Oh, God. Well, on John Naka, he's forever, my inspiration. I love looking through the photos. Fortunately, I've taken many photos of him, and I remember the wonderful times that we spent together. So it's again those memories, whether it's John or a lot of my friends from years gone by, or my friends now. It's that experience, and those experiences are precious. And but the bonsai in Southern California, in particular, that's what I know best. It's we're trying to reinvent ourselves. We've some clubs have gone under, and post COVID and iPhones and all of that, they're we struggle sometimes. Some clubs struggle to maintain their viability. Some others are doing really well. So so my big take on this is that I need to be a part of this community to support and encourage others, because that's as in my gray graying elder years. I want this to continue, and to do that, I need to be a part of the process, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be as encouraging and as supportive as I can of the bonsai community, so that we can continue to thrive. And that's my goal. One of the things that I do, I volunteer at the Huntington Library and Gardens in the bonsai nursery, so I can have my, I can help out there. And we do these children's workshops per year now, and I'm a part of that. And we're introducing kids and teenagers to bonsai, and we're just that's the future. That's the future. So, my commitment is any and all of the bonsai community, whether it's children's workshops or the work at the Huntington or clubs. It's a really good thing. And even like this little podcast, spreading the word wherever you are in this world, and whatever your skill set is, you just have to move forward and enjoy. And that's the whole thing. The most important thing is enjoy what you're doing. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Cheryl.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
The Bonsai Time podcast is purely grown and horticulturally crafted by Kevin Ferris, Ryan Houston, and Kelly Louie. To find out more and see pictures about today's interview or sponsors, see the show notes linked in the description. Submit questions, suggestions, or tree pictures for future discussion episodes. Find the contact form on our website, bonsaitimepodcast.com, or message us directly at bonsaitimepodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support future episodes, please rate us, share episodes, donate, or become a sponsor. The music on today's episode was provided by Midi Cancer. To find more of their work, check out their SoundCloud and Bandcamp pages. To stay in touch with us, subscribe to the Bonsai Time podcast on your favorite podcast app, Instagram, or YouTube, and Facebook. To contact us individually, Kevin's Instagram is Kevin_Ferris PNW, Kelly's Instagram is Bonsai with Kelly, Ryan's website is invivobonsai.com, and his Instagram is invivobonsai. Thank you all, and remember, bonsai on!